Agile is good for an internal department, better for an internal department, or for a company that exists to sell online, because it's their business and they know, the pressure to deliver is high.
Hello everyone, welcome to the best day of the week. Paul Gerrard is our guest today. Paul, with so many years of experience in a software development world, he will teach us, he's going to show us how to become a better QA engineer. And he's going to give us a very interesting feedback about the Agile methodology. Stay tuned. And if you like it, please hit the like button. And again, don't forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos in the future. Let's go. Paul, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm sure that's going to be a very interesting conversation with you. But before I start posing a lot of questions, why don't you start introducing yourself?
My background is, I did an engineering degree, and my first day at work at an engineering company, the partner in charge of me said, "We have no work for you, but we've just had a computer delivered and we need someone to figure out what we can do with it as engineers." And so my fate was sealed. So I was into IT almost the first day of my so-called engineering career. And pretty quickly, I fell in love with it and got involved. And I probably spent 10 years working as maybe 12 years working as a developer, team lead, project manager. And then I got into testing in 1992, I think it was exactly. Worked for a company called Système Evolutif, doesn't matter, it's ancient history now. And basically did consulting as a test consultant, but test manager, doing teaching, writing test strategies. I got involved in conference work. Pretty much that's what I've been doing since the 1990s.
And the good thing to have someone like you with so many years of experience, because you can say and explain the evolution when talking about testing. We know how testing was being doing before, right? At the beginning, we know the state and the maturity that the testing teams and the testing structure within a software development team has evolved. Can you bring a little bit to this audience this evolution, how the testing was being doing before and how it is done today?
In those days, I think there were smaller projects run in a very informal way, but very large, and there were very large projects. And there didn't seem to be kind of medium-sized projects but this is my experience. And the largest projects, in banks and insurance companies and these guys, yes, they were very much script-driven, bureaucratic, lots of paperwork, long projects, 9 months, 18 months, 2 years, these were not unusual. And the bigger the project, clearly the longer things took. And those projects still exist. Those kinds of projects still exist. But of course, 20 years ago, probably 7 or 8 years after I got started with testing, then Agile came along and people said, well, hold on, we should be breaking big projects into small projects, much shorter timescales, faster iterations, keep releasing and testing and getting user feedback and so on and so forth, all the Agile stuff. And so a comment I've got on the whole Agile thing now is we are 20 years into Agile, and I think we're probably halfway. So this is a 40-year project. At any rate, I think where we're at is it's a very dynamic environment now. And everyone says this, the future's happening faster every day. But I think it's true. I think the change is happening all the time. Technologies are coming at us like there's no tomorrow, People are using software which they have no experience in. It's bleeding edge. And so they make the same mistakes that we made 25 years ago and 30 years ago, I think. And so testers have lots of work to do. Tools are fantastic, but then again, we still use tools which are, I would say, based on the same thinking of 25 or 30 years ago.
I see.
So that's a disappointment. Again, something you might want to, I could talk more about where tools might go. But people's thinking, I think the problem we've got now is that people who have learned how to test, say, even 2 or 3 years ago, are finding that what they learned is hard to transfer into new projects. Because I worked on so many projects, it was always the case. Everything I knew was thrown away. I'd start again every 2 or 3 years. And that's how, so you have to kind of step back and say, well, look, I don't care how things were done in the past. What are the core thinking skills that you need to test anything? And so for the last maybe 10 years, I think, what I've been working on is this idea of a model for how testers think, and to use that to teach testing and say, look, although the technologies change, your businesses change, the scale of projects goes up and down, the thinking you do, the thinking you go through, the thought processes don't change. And so that's where I'm kind of focused now on skills, in that if you can teach people how to think, they then become more flexible and agile, let's say, to adapt to different environments, different technologies, different cultures, different everything. So that's kind of where I'm at in my kind of life, if you like.
No, that's perfect. So as per what you are saying, so at the very beginning, very common situation, testing was doing very ad hoc. And then they created like a very robust and, tough process to start doing testing, right? And I'm just saying that because when you start dealing with software development and testing, it was early 2000s. And I learned initially the Rational Unified Process, RUP. So tons of documentations, the test case documents like huge, and you need to have everything very detailed. The approval process needs to be there. But it was on the same time that Agile was being created. So it was a very good transition between one world to another. And of course, nowadays we see like everyone goes towards the Agile path, and like the integration between the test team, like the QA engineers and the development team has increased, right? This relationship. But my question for you, Paul, before when everyone was start using testing in a formal way, everyone was concerned about tools, like putting a microscope into that piece of code to say, okay, this piece of code works well, but the general idea was not being discussed. My question is, do you think that nowadays, or in a short period of time to the future, the testers and the QA engineers can become more business driven or business aware, with the fact that they start helping the business from a testing perspective? And it's not just like, I'm the testing team, I'm a QA, I'm gonna only test this piece of software that you request me to do. But you start talking about more business language. What do you think about that, Paul?
I think the answer is yes. Okay. Yes, testers need to get closer to businesses to understand requirements in a better way. So one of the reasons for Agile existing is because, except in a small niche of business areas, requirements are never fully understood. So if you're putting, I'm going to contradict myself in a moment, but if you're putting software into airplanes, okay, you cannot allow airliners to fall out of the sky because of a software bug. So very precise requirements, very disciplined processes, very systematic engineering principles, let's say, are required. That's fine. And so because we don't understand requirements well enough, we need to have a better mechanism for learning what the system should do. And as we build the system and show it to our users, the users then get a better understanding, and then they say, well, that's really good, but what I really want is this, which is different. And so there's a learning exercise on the user's side, on the business side. There's a learning exercise in the developer side, because they're trying to figure out what the hell is required at the same time trying to build stuff. And it's very messy. It's a very messy kind of process. So where Agile helps is it aids this collaboration aspect, because one way of looking at a software project would be it has requirements coming in and software coming out. Okay, maybe that's not really very helpful in most projects. What a software project really is a learning process, maybe a little bit of research, a bit of a research project to understand the problem, and that might take 6 months or a year. And in the meantime, our knowledge essentially is captured not in documents but in the code. And so one way of looking at a software project is it's a learning process, it's collaborative, it's iterative. We make lots of mistakes, we have lots of experiments, we have some success, some failures. It's very messy. And the only way to get through that is to be very, very collaborative. And I think the testers have to take on a much more collaborative role with developers and users, let's say developers and users. And developers tend to be, this is a generalization, I know, they are technical people. They love the technology, they love solving problems, they don't like people because they want to focus on the computer. Okay, it's a generalization, so it's an insult, I know. Okay. But let's say it's a stereotype. Now the users don't want to go into technology, they don't understand, they don't want to understand. So between developers and users, there's a communications problem straight away, because they are on different kind of levels of abstraction, you know, and they talk different language maybe. Now, what the tester can do is the tester can listen to a user and challenge the user's thinking and come up with examples to say, well, if this is what you want, well, what happens in this situation? And that doesn't sound good. And can we talk about this? And I might give you some examples of your requirement not working. So we can fix the requirement, we can test the requirement, we can fix it. At the same time, that conversation can be shared with the developers to say, look, we've got a vague requirement here, and here are some examples, but what do you need to know, to the developers, in order to make that requirement more concrete? And the developers can say, well, I need to think about what happens in this situation, that situation, whatever. And they think like testers, and testers and developers are not so different, I think. But I think the tester has a much bigger role as one of communication between the two sides, as a middle person, middle man, middle woman, whatever. And also to challenge both sides, to test the software produced by the developers, but also to test the ideas of the users and to challenge the ideas of users. Because if the users can get their understanding of a requirement more correct, we'll have a better product in the end. So the long answer is also yes. In that, yes, I think testers need to get more business oriented, sure, but also in some environments you need to get more technically oriented to understand what developers are doing. So it depends on the project. You need to go in both directions, I think.
We know that TDD approach has been there for some time, right? Quite some years. But you know that the evolution is now start talking about BDD, right? The BDD approach. And I think this new approach, I'm gonna call new just because the time span that we are talking about, but we know that it has been there for a couple of years. But the BDD approach, we need to have developers, we need to have the QA team, we need to have customers, everyone involved to be successful in this approach. Otherwise, you cannot understand the behavior of that application. And I think this approach supports what you are saying, because now instead of talking about unit testing, I need to discuss about the behavior of the system. And you cannot talk about behavior without talking about with the users, with the QA team, with the developers, everyone pretty much involved in that specific project to understand how the system needs to behave. So I think that this evolution to start using BDD in a concrete way shows that testers in the QA team are more business aware than before. Do you agree with this statement? Do you think that I'm correct?
Yeah, I think so. It's what's to me what's really useful. That I mean, if you talk to the BDD consultants, the ones who really know their stuff, the ones that invented it 10 years ago or whenever it was, they would say that people obsess about tools and technology. And what BDD is about collaboration. And the mechanism for collaboration is conversation, of course, but it's also examples. And what BDD, you know, if you're going to use something like Cucumber and stories in the form of Gherkin stories, you know, the most valuable part of a story are the examples or the scenarios, as they might be called. Because what you can do with examples is you can have a conversation whereby, okay, you tell me what you're, we discuss a story, you tell me as customer what you want, and I, as a tester, will say, okay, if I understand it correctly, when the system, you know, when I do A, B, and C, to the, you know, I input A, B, and C to the system, then D, E, F come out of the system. Is that correct? Here's my example. Is that correct? And the user might say, that's perfect. The user might say, no, how did you get that idea? Well, I read your story. This is what your story told me. And I've just given you an example. I've given you feedback. And so what Agile is all about is rapid feedback. And what stories allow us to do with examples is to challenge our sources of information. And those sources of information are usually users, but they could be developers too. And so the biggest deal about BDD is not Cucumber and the technology, whatever, it's the collaboration and the use of examples to challenge people's understanding and to refine understanding. And you could say, what is an example? What is a challenge? It's a test. And testers are good at creating tests, good at creating examples, like a test case. But we're not using that language in those conversations. We're not saying, I'm testing you. I'm not doing that. I'm just trying to understand. And here is my understanding. And if you say that's wrong, we've got a problem, because you might understand it perfectly as a user, but if the tester doesn't understand it and the developer makes, again, different assumptions and doesn't understand it the same way, we've got a problem. So the tester has a big contribution to make to basically push examples in all directions to say, are we all on the same level of understanding? Are we all on the same page? You know. So to me, the value of BDD is the collaboration and the use of examples to give rapid feedback, to clarify people's understanding of a requirement, and also clarify the developer's understanding.
But I have another big question to you, Paul. And I understand it's going to take some time for you to answer that. And imagine that you are in a consulting world, right? You are a consulting company that provides software to your client. Pretty normal situation, standard one. Everyone has been there once. And we are delivering this project with using or trying to use the Agile methodology. Sometimes it is more like a phased waterfall rather than a pure Agile. But it is hard to create this collaboration between the development team, the QA team, and the product owner, the people from the client side, right? They normally don't want. I'm gonna be very general now, but I don't want to make an assumption. But sometimes it's hard to fit these two teams together to really create a collaborative way. Just because the client said, guys, this is the project that I need, this is a product that I need, go there, developed. And the development team, of course, they understand, no, we need to collaborate more. Not only the development team, all the team, right? The whole team, we need to collaborate more, we need to communicate more, but sometimes it's difficult to create this synergy. Have you ever faced any situations like this? And how would be your recommendation, Paul, to effective adding these good testing strategies to a software development lifecycle where you do have these two different companies, two different worlds, probably working at different synergy, different frequency?
I think every project encounters that, where you have a customer and a supplier. And it's easier to think of, big structured projects, waterfall projects, let's say, in that way. because what you have is a detailed contract, which basically is transactional, and it basically says the client will give the supplier some information, the requirements. The supplier will give the client a product, a system, some software, whatever it is. The client will then test it, assuming it's been system tested, but then test it. And then so it's very transactional. And as soon as you have that, it's easy to understand the project as a series of activities in stages. The problem is we know that doesn't work. And so, big projects have that problem in spades. It's awful. Okay, so we understand that. One of the reasons for going down the Agile route is to avoid this kind of transactional state-based project, if you like. So project has stages. I would call them states. And there's a change of state, but it's never a perfect transition. There's always loose ends and complications, and it's messy. There are leaks, and gaps and holes and all sorts of stuff, going wrong. So, okay, so how do we get a contract together to encourage better behavior? And I'm dwelling on a contract because even in an internal development with say 2 developers and a product owner and a tester, there should be some kind of agreement about how you're going to deliver what you're going to deliver. So if you like, it's very hard to define a contract that is not fixed in price if you don't know what the end goal is. And that's the problem we have to solve. And so then the client will say, well, hold on, let's say I've got to spend $100,000, right? I've got $100,000 to spend, and I will wait for what you produce. And then whatever I get for $100,000, that's it. Now, the problem the client has is the boss of that client will say, am I going to get my system to do X, Y, and Z? And the product owner will say, well, I just don't know. And that's not acceptable. And so companies with fixed goals, but with a poor understanding of requirements, get into big trouble because they think, well, my goal is simple. Why isn't the software simple? And we all know software is never, well, it's very, very rarely simple, is it? So we have this problem, and Agile doesn't solve that because Agile is good for an internal department, better for an internal department, or for a company that exists to sell online because it's their business and they know, the pressure to deliver is high, but everybody knows it's an uncertain process, whatever. But if you work for a bank and the legal framework has changed or it's changing on the 30th of April, and that's a fixed deadline, and you've got to have features in your software by that date, you cannot deal with uncertainty. And we have that problem still. We have this difficulty.
And it's not, I'm not blaming them, of course, but it is what it is. We do have a senior leadership, we do have a board with a budget approved for that specific year to do certain things. They cannot sign a blank check and say, no, let me hire this supplier and whatever they can deliver to me, I'm fine with it. It doesn't work, right, in the real world. It's good in a conceptual world, but the real world doesn't work like this. But how this can be changed, Paul? How do you solve this problem?
I'm not so sure. I think, just going back to Waterfall again, is the supplier, when they take on a fixed price contract, say, will know the requirements are terrible. And so they carry on with the project. And then what suppliers are very good at is saying, well, the requirement was vague. What we built meets that requirement, but if a vague requirement can be met in many, many ways. So, and probably we're wrong. So what then happens is, if you change the requirement, I'm going to send you a bill for the change request. Or I'm going to, so that's one thing which might delay the project and projects get into trouble and so on and so forth. Now, in a very large formal project, these mechanisms of change requests, configuration control, testing stages, inputs, entry and exit criteria, all that kind of stuff, and payments. The money is a big deal. These are all very formally defined and structured, and there are massive dependencies. It's very complicated. With an agile team working well, all these little complications are discussed every day. And so they never become big problems. I mean, they could be a big problem if you really misunderstand the requirement that you're trying to satisfy. But essentially, the idea of agile is to give continuous small pieces of feedback. So you make small adjustments, not massive adjustments. And so it's easier in a culture of trust, where everyone is in the same culture, everyone is in the same organization, everybody knows that no one's going to get fired. Well, hopefully, no one's going to get fired if you don't deliver on time. And no one's going to be taken to court, and lawyers are not going to be hired, and all that other good, So there's less kind of, it's a more fluid environment. So I think this is where I do have some suggestions. Is I think we need to move away from staged processes like Waterfall, and we also need to work to do better than Scrum, for example. Because Scrum, if you unwrap it, it's still a staged process. And so where I think we should go, we should look further into this. And I'm not saying I know how to do this, but my suggestion would be we should treat projects as event-driven. Our processes should be event-driven. That is, every morning, something weird can happen. So there's a bug in production, there's a change in the legal framework, there's a failure in a test. These are all events, and we have to have processes that deal with events in a better way. And so rather than a flow chart where you have a sequence of dependent activities, like a flow chart, we have a continuous loop of every morning we have a conversation, like in projects I worked on, we used to call it morning prayers. Like a little prayer meeting. And in the evening, we'd have another one and say evening prayers. And during the day, if the phone rings and something happens and you need a conversation, you go and talk to the person you need to talk to. And so our processes are event-driven. And Agile simply says the same thing. It says we need rapid feedback, continuous feedback, and we react quickly. So that the risk of failure is much reduced because they are small failures, not massive failures, and so on.
If we discuss, right, the ad hoc process from beginning to do testing, and then we see the integration between testing, the QA team, and the development team. Now the whole team is like working collaboratively, and we have this change of methodology. Now everyone talks Agile, and DevOps has everyone start talking about DevOps, because now we have the development team, not only the programmers, but the testers, everyone collaborating with the operations team, creating this synergy. It's just because the testing team was already there. And now we do have another team like being attached to this process, the security team. Now we are talking about DevSecOps, not only DevOps. So that, of course, this is a very good evolution, but my question to you is, we know a lot of challenges and hurdles that the QA team has been facing throughout the years, but what do you think it's gonna be the next challenges for this team? It is this integration with new teams, like now embedded into the process. It's gonna be a good thing, it's gonna be a bad thing. How do you think it's gonna be the challenges that the testers and the QA structure can face in the future?
I think a shorter answer would be that usually the role of the tester is not well defined in agile projects. And so testers, who used to work in a team with a test manager are now working as an individual as part of a team. So who looks after test strategy? Who coordinates the testing across developers, what testers do, what users do? Who liaises with stakeholders to judge whether bugs should be fixed, and so on and so forth. And so what I would say is testers who work in agile teams have to become or have to take on some test management roles, test leadership roles.
Mm-hmm.
In order to do that, they have to have an understanding of the process better.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be good testers, let's say. They have to have very good communication skills to talk to the techies, to talk to the business, and so on. They have to negotiate the distribution of testing. So rather than write a 100-page test strategy, there's got to be some kind of deal which says, look, developer, I'm not going to test your services in a way that you would be happy with, because I'm not a techie. So, but I need you to test this, this, and this in your own way, using, in your TDD process, or how are we going to do it? By the same token, the users are going to test things like end-to-end and more business-oriented and very much more through the user interface. Fine, so they're going to do some stuff. And what's left is what the tester does. And the tester has to figure out who gets which piece of the testing cake. And so testers don't own testing anymore. It's not like who tests, it's the tester, no one else tests. That's not the case anymore. It cannot be that way anymore. So in order to take that role, I started calling people who do that test masters, because they are more than a tester. They might do very little testing. If their project is all about services, they're not going to get their hands on services, but they might define tests for the developers to build.
I see.
And they might coach the users to do a better job of testing when they get all these services working together. And so the tester might be more a coordinator than an actual tester, and every project's different. So all I'm trying to say is the future tester, I think, will be technically capable of doing anything. They have to be. They will be able to liaise and understand with developers, understand the technology and how to test it. They will understand users and what they are trying to do. So they need the business attention. They will coach users, and they might coach developers too, but they have a coach mentoring role as well. And they have a huge requirement to be a better communicator, to explain what testing is telling a project. So it's quite a broad role. And now the alternative to that is the tester just sits at their desk, doesn't talk to anyone, gets some software thrown over the cubicle, tap, 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 yeah, and they throw it to the users and whatever. And I don't think that's very helpful.
No, it's a very interesting way to put the challenges, Paul. And I think you just answered 80% of my next question. And let me explain why. You are saying that all the major challenges that this team can face in the future, or may face in the future, is more related to soft skills rather than hard skills. Exactly. Which for me, it's almost all situations is like the technical stuff. Everyone can learn like this, right? So many sources that we can put everything together and learn these hard skills. But these soft skills is something that takes some time to learn or to adapt themselves. And my next question to you is, if we want to become a QA top performer, right? The best of the bests, what would be the skills needed for it?
Well, I think the emphasis for the tester, this is just the tester, the emphasis would be to take soft skills much more seriously. And so we are agreed there. The challenge, as I see it, is that some people in our industry find that very, very hard to do. And so developers, I mean, I'm generalizing, developers tend to be more challenged by having conversations and with uncertainty, and also difficult conversations. They want to just talk to the computer, you know. And I'm suggesting that good testers are going to be they're going to be stronger with the interpersonal skills. And so these skills are going to be communication skills, getting your message over, both reading and writing and talking and presenting and sharing data, and presentation of data is a critical skill that we don't teach very well or at all. We need persuasion skills and negotiation skills, because if the developers don't do their technical testing, no one is going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to persuade the developers to say, look, guys, you've got to do this. And we can get a project manager to come and beat them up over the head. But I think the tester is a better negotiator, should be a better negotiator than a bully with a stick, you know. And we have negotiation skills with the users to get them to recognize that they're not very good at writing requirements sometimes. So we have to communicate examples and problems. You know, we have to give bad news as well.
Mm-hmm.
We have to do that in a way that doesn't upset people, but it's a kind of, it's not personal, it's business, you know. It's like in that way, you know. And I think coaching, mentoring skills are part of the game, because, you know, if I go to the developers and say, you guys should do much better technical testing, they'll say, I don't know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So the tester needs to say, well, look, if I give you some requirements that you understand for testing, you're just going to be writing some code. You know? Okay, so maybe that's the way you talk to the developer. Whereas with the users, you're going to get more graphical and say, here's your business process. When you test, if you want to test thoroughly, you trace paths, you cover the outcomes of decisions, you know, and so on and so forth. So I think there's coaching in all directions, and coaching and mentoring that's why I say, well, you know, the role of a test master is a bit like a scrum master. They are as much a coach. They're not a manager so much as a coach. And they might be coaching detailed technical stuff rather than very serious high level management theory. They're not doing that, but they're just trying to make the project better informed so everybody knows what's happening, and to get people to encourage people to take control over the information they need to make decisions. Because all testing ever does is give people information to make a decision, to fix a bug, to accept you know, to transition this project from system to acceptance testing, to conduct an investigation into the database because the data's all screwy. You know, all we do is provide information for other people to make decisions. And so we should try and make that our goal, that's what testing is about. It's an information provision service. And that information has great value.
Every single person, no matter what position, needs to focus on the soft skills for the future, right? To communicate better, to negotiate better, and to give feedback better, to receive feedback better, in a better way. So this is pretty much everyone's challenge and needs to be the goal for everyone in the future. Paul, thank you very, very much for your presence today. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone who are listening now have learned a lot with you. So thank you very much, and hope I can see you in the future.
I hope so. It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
What did that tell you? I hope, guys, you have enjoyed this conversation. If you have any comments, please write on the comment section below. If you want to understand more about Paul, check the description. All the information is there. See you next Wednesday.